Webhooks are a way to connect different systems together. Now, webhooks are actually built, of course, on the whole platform of web services. And in Business Central, it's always been easy for us to actually expose data on web services. Back in the days, we would take a page and then we would publish it as a web service, and then people could use either OData or SOAP to call our web service. Now, this is also still possible, of course, in Business Central, and it still works. The only problem with this pattern is, of course, when you start having integrations that keeps on having being in sync with different systems. Because while it's easy for us to publish this page and expose it to the internet, the other system then doesn't know when things have changed, so they have to keep on asking Business Central if there's some new updates. Now, this is normally done by some kind of timer, which runs once every 10 minutes, once every hour, or whatever you decide how often you have to update. And this, of course, works, but it has some problems. One of those problems is that it causes some kind of complexity on the other side, which means they have to make some kind of timer or something that keeps on running to ask for these updates in an interval. The other problem is that once you call Business Central, of course, Business Central has to process the request. And even though there might not be anything for it to actually process, it just returns an empty array or whatever it does. It's still something it has to do. And if something calls you a lot, it can affect your performance. Now, there are some ways around this, of course. In Business Central, we can set our API pages for access intent data read. That means that it's actually recurring against a not production service tier and database, but a replica. On-prem, we would take the service tier, we will then move it to a different server, thereby loading off all the requests to a different server and thereby not having any kind of influence on the production server. Of course, the SQL server behind is still going to be the same in most cases, but the SQL server is not going to be our problem here. And of course, this is something you should always do, no matter what, because you should always have anything that is accessible from the internet on a DMC server, so for security reasons. Now, that's one way for us to integrate Business Central to other systems. And that's using the pull technology, where someone keeps on pulling us. And this idea is okay, but if you think about it in a different kind of terms, it could be a pregnant woman lying in labor, ready to give birth, and then someone keeps on calling the husband to ask, is it now? Is it now? Is it now? Is it now? And the husband, of course, even though there's nothing has happened, he has to take the phone, answer the phone, which is, of course, some kind of technical debt. And he has to say, no, it's not yet. And then, okay. And then 5 minutes later, someone calls again and says, is it now? And he keeps on saying, no, 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 no. Now, as long as it's only one-to-one, that's not a big problem. But soon as you have a lot of people asking, keep on calling him, he's going to use all his time on the phone and he cannot use his time with his wife, for example, in this case. And it's the same with Business Central. If they keep on using all the resources to answer all these requests coming in and also always just saying no, you cannot use your resources to do what the user is doing, like bookkeeping or whatever they're doing inside Business Central. So that's the pattern that is called pull. Then, of course, we have the pattern called push. Now, the pattern called push is a little bit better. In many ways, it's better for performance. That's when Business Central, because we know when things are changing. So we will use some AL code written, use a HTTP trigger, and we will call the system saying, now this item has been updated, this customer has been updated, and then only firing when things have been done. Now, the problem with this, of course, is it's going to take us customizations because we're going to have to write this AL code that's going to push, which can be simple, but it can also be complicated depending on what kind of security policy the end system we're calling is using. If it's using some kind of two-factor authentication flow, is using some kind of OAuth or whatever it's using, we have to handle that in our AL code. Besides that, the system that we are calling also has to be able to actually process our request. So that means that they have to facilitate this kind of behavior. And not all systems are like Business Central, where it's just easy for us to expose data. Some systems are custom systems, some means they have to make some custom endpoints. So that, of course, is better because it's better for our performance. But in the end, it's still not the best solution because, as I said before, it's going to give us something we have to program, which we have to maintain, which can give us some technical debt, and so on. So if you go back to the example before with the pregnant wife lying in labor, it would be like the husband sending a SMS or text message first to one person saying, she's going into labor now, she's giving birth, then to the next one, then the next one, the next one, the next one. And then he's sitting all the time on the phone, sending SMS or text messages, sending. And then now, of course, everyone now is informed, but then he's using all his time sending all these things. And he also have to, some people might want their text message on SMS. Someone might want it on iMessenger. Some might want it on WhatsApp, and so on and so on. So he has to have a lot of different apps, which again would be like Business Central. You might have a lot of different kinds of endpoints you have to call to actually send this data to people. Now, so how do we solve this? Well, that's where we come in with the webhooks. The idea behind the webhooks are they're built on the pattern called "Don't call us, we'll call you." And what do we mean by this? Well, it's actually a combination of the pull and push patterns. So what we're doing is that Business Central can have these kinds of subscriptions, as we already know them inside Business Central, but people of a system can subscribe to our events and saying, okay, when something happens on this record, on the item, the customer records, we're going to send you an ID of the record has been changed. And then you're going to have a system that says, okay, I've been notified that this has been changed, so I'll call back to you and actually get those updates. Thereby, you don't have something calling it all the time because you're only calling when it's actually needed. But you're still using the API pages, which is easy for us to implement in Business Central because they're pretty much standard. And the webhooks functionality is not something we had to program either because it's also standard. So here we're actually using a little bit of push, a little bit of pull, but we're only doing it when it's actually needed. And on top of that, a lot of different subscribers can actually subscribe to the same event like we do in Business Central, which means if you have a lot of different systems that needs to know that the customer has been updated, they all use the same subscription. So if we go back to the example of the woman, this would mean that this person has actually, the husband is sitting and he's writing a group message, sending it out to everyone saying she's going into labor, and everyone is now notified. And then they can start calling him if they want to know more information, of course. Or they can say, I don't have time right now to call you, but thanks for information. We might put this into our queue, like you could do in the IT structure. You can have like some kind of service bus saying, thanks for notification. I don't need right now to have the newest update for this item, but it's good to know I have it in my queue. And once I'm ready to process it, I will call you and I will get these updates. And that's the same where we go back to the example. People are saying, oh, that's great. Now I know, but it's 2 a.m. in the morning and I don't really want to bother you right now or I'm asleep. But now I know inside my group message and everyone else who also knows, and some people might be able to call in and some people might not. Of course, you shouldn't call anyone at 2 a.m. in the morning, but you get the point. So that's what we are going to look at today, is how we're going to set this up in Business Central. Now, as I said, it's actually quite simple. You can use all the standard API pages. These API pages can be subscribed to. Any API page can subscribe to, so you can also do a custom subscription. And then we're going to make it a little bit simple. We're going to create an Azure function that's going to be the one that we're going to notify. And it's also going to be one to go back to Business Central. Now you could also do this, of course, in a Logic app or Powerflow or anything else you want to do. But I like the ease of use of an Azure function also because I can put everything inside one thing, so I don't have to create this flow where, of course, you have to do Logic apps and so on. Well, let's just try to take a look at it. So as I talked about earlier, for webhooks to work in Business Central, you're going to need a notification URL. And to get this notification URL, I'm using an Azure function. So my source code is here. You can also get the source code if you want down in the description below. There's a link for my GitHub. How I've organized my code is that I've created this class called Business Central Services, a service where I do all the integrations with Business Central. I have some get access tokens and I get some patch, which is the one I'm going to be using when I need to update or refresh my subscription or renew it. Then I got the code here, which is used to use get against my Business Central when I want to get a record. And lastly, I got down here to process my notifications that is coming from my Business Central. So I'm not going to go into too much depth with this, because if you're interested, of course, the code is available to you, and it's not really that complicated. But if you look here, I got a timer as a function for a timer that's going to renew. Mine is set to renew every day. We have a parameter here to decide how often it's going to run. And the reason why is because a subscription in Business Central in the cloud is going to expire every 3 days. So you're going to have to refresh it every 3 days, otherwise you cannot use it. Now on-prem, there's an ability to set this to a longer period, but it's still going to expire, so you're still going to need to refresh it. So for that, I've created this Azure function, and all it does is it's calling my Business Central, looking for a subscription, and if it finds a subscription based on my notification URL, I'm going to create a patch against it, where I'm going to patch the new update, and then it's going to renew it for 3 days more. So just remember to do that if you're running a subscription that needs to keep on running. This of course is a security, so you don't have a lot of subscriptions running that's not used. And then I got my Azure function itself, that is the one that's taking against my notifications. So all it does is it has to take a HTTP request that comes, and then depending on what kind of request, if it has a validation token, I'm going to log it, and I'm going to say, okay, I am a valid notification URL, send that back to Business Central, and Business Central says, okay, this is actually a valid subscription. If it doesn't have a valid validation token, that means that what I'm sending at that moment is actually a record or notification of some kind, and all I'm doing is logging it, and then I'm passing the record, and in my case I'm using item. So I'm calling Business Central, and then I'm actually getting the notification URL, calling it back to Business Central, getting the item, and then I'm just logging the item into my Azure function. Of course, in real life you would do something with this record, but in this case I'm just blocking it. So if you try to look here at how my monitor would run, so you can see here I have executed my notification, which means Business Central has called me. I've gotten a new notification. What I've gotten is this, the subscription ID, and I got the expiration date, and then I got a resource, which means this is actually the link to Business Central. So if you look at it, it's a standard API I'm calling against my dev environment, and I'm calling against this company, and I'm calling with the system ID for this item. So if I call this, it's going to process it, which I'm doing in my Azure function, and then it's returning down here. This is actually the item that has been updated. And that's pretty much how Webhook works. Now, the big thing about these webhooks are that if you are subscribing, for example, on the item, it doesn't matter which fields are available on this API page. You're going to get notifications no matter what field is actually being changed on the item, which is kind of annoying, because normally if you're subscribing to an API page, you will think, okay, I'm only interested in maybe the item number, item description, and so on. So I'm not really, if the unit of measure is changing, I really don't care. But that's not how Business Central is working. That's because Business Central is hooking in on the global trigger modification. So what it's doing is saying, if there's a subscription on this record of any kind, I'm going to trigger it, and then it's going to be fired against whatever notification URLs that are subscribing to it. A way around this is, of course, if you create a lock in between, and then it's the lock that you are subscribing to. So that means that you're only locking something inside this lock when it makes sense, and then using the ID there. If we look at how we actually, the calls that we are using, we can go here. So any API page in Business Central can be subscribed to. So if we use this URL I got up here, which is just going to list any API pages, webhook supported resources, I get a list of all the different resources that I can subscribe to. And here there will also be, if I had any custom endpoints, they will also be available here. Now, in my example, I was using the item. So what I do is I have to register it. So doing a register call is like this. We call the same URL for the subscription, which we also have up here, which we'll get back to anyway. And then doing a post against it with this kind of payload. So the notification URL is the URL to our Azure function. The resource is the URL to our API page. So here I am subscribing to items, and then I got my secret token down here. And the secret token is not something that is needed as such. It's more something that you can use to make sure that it's only the correct things that are subscribing. So you have some kind of security bound here saying that if this actually is my my client state, then okay, this is a valid notification. So if I run this, I have up here a get against the same URL with the subscriptions. Now all these URLs, I'm going to put them in the description also, so you can run them yourself. It will list all the active subscriptions I have. So here we can see I only have one active subscription, which is on my item, and it's giving me the notification URL, like the one we just had, the resources, and then it's giving me the different expiration dates and so on. Now, if I did not have something, now I have, this is running against my version 2.0. If I wanted to run against 1.0, because some APIs are still running 1.0, it will return an empty array, which means I don't have any active subscriptions in my 1.0 subscriptions. So that's something you have to keep in mind, that the notification URL has to be exactly the same as the subscription URL. So if you're running against a 2.0, it has to be a 2.0 and not a 1.0. Well, as I said, it's actually quite simple how these webhooks work in Business Central. It's a powerful tool, but you need to think a little bit about how to implement them, because as I also said earlier, it's maybe sending too much information, considering the fact that anything changed on the record that you are subscribing to, you're going to be notified even if you don't really care about those fields. And again, remember to always have a renew of some kind, so you can renew your subscription. So you don't run into the problem that all of a sudden your systems are out of sync because notifications are no longer being sent because your subscription has expired. So if we look to behind the scenes of how Business Central is actually handling this, as I said earlier, it has a global subscription. It has a global trigger subscription, just saying that if something's changed on something that it's subscribed to, it's going to create a record into our subscription notification table. And then there's a code unit that's going to start as a background task, and that's going to trigger this HTTP call to our Azure function. It's going to send, as we saw, a URL with the system ID of the record that has been changed. You then use that resource to get back the record, and then you do whatever you want with that record afterwards. So that's actually it for these webhooks. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and goodbye.